My name is Kathy Hill.
And I'm Aida Villanueva, and we are PhD candidates in sociology at the University of Texas at Austin and mentees of Dr. Jennifer Glass.
We're here chatting with Dr. Jennifer Glass, who was recently awarded the 2020 American Sociological Association Jesse Bernard Award, which recognizes her excellence in research, teaching, mentorship, and service, particularly in expanding the role of women in society. So congratulations, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. It was a big honor to win the award, very unexpected.
We are very excited. We are so thrilled to talk to you about your contributions to sociology and to our department at the University of Texas at Austin. But first, we want to make a note of a few of your many accomplishments. Dr. Jennifer Glass is a gender and labor certification scholar who focuses on the impact of work and family on individual well-being and socioeconomic inequalities. She has published over 50 articles and books on work and family issues, gender certification in the labor force, mother's employment, and mental health, as well as religious conservatism and women's economic attainment. She is also the executive director of the Council of Contemporary Families. We wanted to start, Jennifer, talking a little bit about your influences. What are the influences that have shaped your research?
Well, I would have to say that like many sociologists, I kind of looked around at the things that were happening to me and to other people in my social world and wondering why sociology was not writing about any of this. And of course, this was many years ago, decades ago now, when looking at women's stratification in the labor market as separate from men's and looking at class reproduction and who was falling into poverty and why was something that was considered the province of men. And what was happening basically in social stratification was the study of occupational inheritance from fathers to sons. And so this was a time when sociologists were slowly realizing that the basis of family support was changing. The divorce revolution had just happened. Increasing numbers of couples were having non-marital births in cohabiting unions or single mothers who were giving birth without partners. And so as the work-family nexus started to change, by the way, there was no word for this. Work-family was something that kind of came out in the decade after I got my PhD. So I remember struggling to find sessions to place my work because I wanted to look precisely at this intersection and specifically what was happening to women in the labor market and what was happening to fertility as a consequence of the difficulties people were having combining work and family. And what I found was that there were a whole host of sessions that were for work over here in the program, and then there were a whole host of sessions over here for family in the program. And there wasn't a single session that tried to look at the intersection between the two and the difficulties that people were having participating in the market precisely because of their family obligations. But these were not just childcare obligations, they were also elder care obligations because we were also going through this revolution in life extension. And the number of people who had chronic diseases in old age that required care was also exploding. So it's funny to think about that now because now you can't imagine a major scholarly organization that's looking at society and social policy not having enormous numbers of sessions precisely on these issues. But at the time, it was a lot of struggle. And I remember in my first few years working on this nexus of work and family life that I would frequently create my own sessions. I would, submit recommendations, and then of course you had to organize them. And so for a long time, I kind of saw myself as the gatekeeper for all work and family research because there weren't any sessions to put them into except for the ones that I was requesting at ASA or PAA or other scholarly organizations. I also had some really great mentors who were both leading by example and also helping me see where my contributions would be greatest. And sometimes they were skeptical of where I was going, and I would say, no, trust me, this is going to be an issue in the years to come. And I think fortunately or unfortunately, I was right. These were the issues that were looming on the horizon. And now there's just an explosion of research. I can't keep up with everything that's going on. We have an entire scholarly organization, the Work Family Research Network, that's devoted to this topic, and it's international in scope. It's not just something happening here. It's happening in all industrialized countries. So those are kinds of, the backdrop influences, of course, were not academic at all. It was the explosion of the feminist movement and the anti-racist movement and the anti-nuke movement of the 1970s and the 1980s. It kind of questioned how we were organizing the fundamentals of society. I remember Sigmund Freud said a long time ago that the two primary twin goals that everybody had to figure out in life was how to work and to love. And I think about that quote a lot because he's basically talking about figuring out your own work family nexus. So that is to work and to love. So I kind of also see myself as bringing us back to the roots of the social science disciplines, because these are the things that everybody has to figure out, whether they do it in an academic scholarly sense or if they just muddle their way through life, making their own choices.
I love that quote that you mentioned from Freud.
Yeah, it is funny. We forget that, but he said that very early on in his career too. That everything basically traces back to that.
So your research, like work-family conflict, for example, a lot of your research takes a policy approach to inequality. So I was wondering if you could tell us more about why looking at policy is so important to sociological research and your research in particular.
I think that we have existing social policies, and they are often called the welfare state or welfare state policy, and they're all constituted based on an understanding of how households would be organized and how the workplace would be organized. That was true in the 1930s and 1940s, which is when most of this legislation was originally passed. And unfortunately, we have had a political crisis of action on the policy front and a refusal to recognize that family structures as well as the labor market have changed, and that many of the regulations that were put in place after the Great Depression to ensure that our nation didn't go through that again have really lost a lot of their teeth. And a lot of exceptions that were made to the legislation that only affected a few people in the 1930s and 40s now affect enormous swaths of the population. So all of that policy infrastructure designed to protect people from the worst excesses of a capitalist system have now been eroded to a place beyond recognition. And they need to be updated, and they need to be updated desperately. And so a lot of the dilemmas that we see in real people's lives come from the failure of our major social institutions to understand just the scope and the consequences of the dramatic changes in family structure and the even just as dramatic changes in the occupational labor market. And once we can really honestly deal with those, I think we'll have a policy infrastructure that better matches how people really live. So we have a policy infrastructure now that creates benefits predominantly for parents who have lost a partner or a spouse through death. Most people don't lose a partner through death anymore, but they oftentimes lose a partner through desertion or failure to appear. So how good are policies that help people in situations that just don't occur very much and refuse to help people in the situations that occur all of the time? So I think that's really the answer to the question about why I focus on policy so much, is that we have a system in place that sometimes makes things worse rather than better.
It is true. It's true.
I want to move on to some of your more current research. So I think you're doing some research on STEM workers, that is mixed methods. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, this is a project I'm doing in collaboration with Sharon Sassler at Cornell University. And we're looking at graduates of two universities in chemistry and chemical engineering over two successive cohorts. And we're trying to figure out why there's such a dramatic reduction in the number of STEM trained workers who stay in STEM over time. And what we found was that while everybody attrites, even white men, that it's just a much quicker process for women and minorities. So in some prior work, we found that over half of STEM graduates who are female have left STEM completely and are employed in a different sector 5 years after graduation. For men, I call it the half-life. The half-life was a little bit longer. It was 10 years following graduation. But it's pretty scary to think about how, if this is the lifespan of a STEM worker, no wonder we have to constantly train and train and train to replenish the ranks. So what's going on in STEM employment? So this grant is designed to try and figure out what happens in those first crucial 5 years. What are the experiences that they have in the labor market? And one of the things we found, and we just finished the second wave of data collection, so I really have no answer to the question of exactly what's going on, but we have some big hints right now. And one of the things that's really clear is that these are jobs that have very high wages and starting salaries, really good perks. They look like plum jobs. But once you start talking to these young people a year or two in, you find that there aren't clear promotion ladders. There aren't clear evaluative standards. And so I remember the comment of a couple of interviewees who said, I'm looking around my work group and I see people in their 40s and 50s and they're doing the same thing that I'm doing right now. And that kind of lack of a clear career path, rapidly changing technologies, but no on-the-job training or no particular platform that would encourage employers to help their employees continuously retrain and refresh, the kinds of continuing education that you see in other professions like in law or in medicine. None of that exists in the STEM fields. So you can see how people could quite easily feel that the only way to move up is to move out, to move into management, to not do technical work anymore. And if you get no support for upgrading your technical skills, it becomes really easy to say, oh, well, 10 years out, my skills are outdated. So I can either move to another field or I can go back and retrain at my own expense. So those are some of the things that we found thus far. But I'm not going to say a whole lot more because we haven't analyzed the data yet. But it is interesting that the biggest fields in STEM are in computer science and engineering. That's 2/3 of the employment in STEM overall. And if you look at the fields where women have made the most progress in STEM, it's every field except those two. So biology, math, all the allied health professions, women are now over 50% of the degree holders. But those are not the most prominent jobs in STEM. So I think that those big, huge fields of engineering and computer science are the ones that we should be talking about more and more. It's not really a STEM problem. It's not really a biology health problem. It's really just about these highly masculinized fields of computer science and engineering.
Fascinating.
Sounds like really important research.
Well, I hope so. We'll see what
Of course it is. And it's fascinating, the preliminary findings you have already.
Certainly. So I want to change topics just a little bit. You are well known for your excellence in teaching undergraduates and graduate students alike. I myself remember how accessible you made learning statistics in my first year of graduate school. And I did a little bit of my own research and found that you have the highest rating, awesome, on ratemyprofessor.com. Students say that you're passionate about your subject material and that your lectures are engaging and inspiring. So I was wondering if you could share any of your secrets you have for being such an amazing teacher.
Oh, you are so nice. I don't think of myself as an amazing teacher. I always worry about my teaching. But I will say this, that when it came to teaching statistics, I remember starting as a TA very, very early in my career. So I think I was in my 3rd year in graduate school, and I kind of TA'd statistics classes and then worked as a research assistant for the rest of my graduate career. And one of the things I noticed is that the professors that they often had teach statistics were the ones that were the brilliant methodologists, right? They knew everything. The problem is that they couldn't remember what it was like not to know. And to teach, you have to remember what it's like not to know anything and to build from not knowing anything to being highly competent. And so they would lecture and unintentionally just throw in things that were too advanced or words that we hadn't covered yet, or try to link concepts together before people had enough familiarity to see how they were linked. And so I vowed that in my own, 1 hour a week lab session, I was going to just tear everything apart and try to put it back together piece by piece. Because I remembered being an undergraduate and I remembered how difficult my first statistics class was, not because the material was hard. I discovered after taking a doctoral exam in methods and statistics that it's actually quite elegant and logical and, mathematically coherent and complete. But it's hard to teach. It's hard to teach it that way. And so I thought I'm going to take a completely different pedagogical approach when I teach it. And I'm going to teach it exactly the way I was helping people in my TA sessions. That I was going to create an entire curriculum that was based on understanding the theory underlying all statistical procedures, and then see all procedures as just variations on a theme. So I like to say I teach it as a symphony. So you're going to get your opening melody, right? This is the theory, and then you just apply it to everything. So I start with probability, and then I work on from there. And in my undergrad classes, I try to do the same thing. I try to remember what it's like to not know. Because when you're a scholar, you read things over and over again, and you see it in the news and whatever, and you just assume everybody knows. How could you not know that fertility is falling in the United States? But then you realize if you're 18 years old and you've just entered college, you have no idea that fertility has been falling in the United States for almost 10 years now. So those are the kinds of things that I think make you a good teacher, is trying to remember what it's like not to know. Mm-hmm. And then how do you teach people who don't already know? Everybody that I know of loves teaching graduate seminars. They love teaching students like you because you already know so much. It's easy to talk to you. There's kind of a baseline set of knowledge taken for granted, and it makes your life a lot easier. But teaching undergraduates, you really have to go back and remember what it's like to be 18. What do you know? You know what your parents exposed you to, which can be pretty narrow. You maybe know what your church taught you, and you know what you had to get through in what are now pretty rigid high school curricula that determine how much math and English you take and how much PE you take, but really doesn't tell you much about the world or very much about the challenges that you're going to face in your future. So that's what sociologists do in our classes. And so we have to start assuming that our students know very, very little about how the world actually works, but that they probably have a lot of mythologies, right? A lot of American ideologies about how hard work will always make you successful and things like that. And that we're the greatest nation on earth and everything we do is fair. We tend to hold on to those notions from our youth. They're very self-soothing and self-sustaining. And part of what we do as sociologists is debunk those. And that's hard. That's hard. It's hard as a student to hear this and accept it and incorporate it into your worldview. So I always try to remember what it's like to not know.
I love that. I love that. Around the same topic, Dr. Glass, you have held numerous leadership positions in academia across your career. In fact, you have been chair of the department at multiple institutions, and you have mentored a number of successful graduate students and faculty members. Actually, I was reading reviews on your work and your career, and one that I loved was some person said you were generous, very generous at sharing this practical wisdom for developing our careers, and I completely aligned with that. I really think that's part of what makes you a great mentor. What advice would you have for junior sociologists as they are building their careers?
Oh, this one is easy because I say this to basically everybody that walks through my door. Be nice to everybody. It doesn't mean you have to like everybody, and it doesn't mean you have to agree with everybody. But just be nice to everybody and listen to everybody, because my experience has been, if you look around the room in any classroom, especially as a graduate student, there are people in that room who are going to control journal editorships and hiring committees and all kinds of things, grant awards, all kinds of things that you may need later in life. And even if you violently disagree with someone or think that they're a terrible person, it doesn't hurt to just be kind and allow people to change, because you'd be surprised how many of those people are going to end up in positions of power at some point in the future. And so the two things that I've learned is that people do change, right? And sometimes someone you couldn't get along with before, now you find, oh, they're brilliant and we could do this project together. Mm-hmm. So give people a chance to grow and change. And the other thing is to find out what you're good at. Try to do more of that and find out what other people are good at and encourage them to develop that further and to specialize in that further. So it's just basically taking more of an optimistic approach to everything, because it's a struggle. Academia is just a struggle. I still face rejection. I get my papers rejected from journals. I get my grant proposals rejected. It never ends. It never ends. The pursuit of excellence means that we criticize all the time. And the only way to make it through that is to not take it personally. It's not about you, it's about the work. Mm-hmm. So what I said about other people is also true for you. Give yourself room to change. Give yourself room to grow. Mm-hmm. And, you might find that your work is becoming better when you listen to other people. So the trick is really figuring out which voices you should listen to and which voices you should just nod and smile and walk away. But the voices that you don't want to listen to are not necessarily the voices that you have to confront directly. That I do believe as Martin Luther King said, that the arc of history does bend towards justice. And if you're saying something that's important and correct, other people will validate it and it will rise to the top. So it just sometimes takes time. So persistence is everything, just wade through the negativity, wade through the critique, use what you can, understand what you can from it, but continue to pursue your ideas.
Jennifer, I think I speak for both of us when I say we're so lucky to have been mentored by you and have received your great advice over the course of our training. So,
yeah. Oh, you guys are so sweet. When you're talking about, mentoring brilliant students, I was thinking, oh, well, here's two of them right now, about to be launched into the world of academia. Pleasure. You just have to understand that. It's a real pleasure sometimes to just take second seat and watch other people develop their talents and their brilliance.
Thank you so much, Dr. Glass. Of course, both of us, we feel grateful and so lucky to have had you as a mentor. Thank you so much, Dr. Glass. We are so thrilled that you have received this so much well-deserved Jessie Bernard Award. Once again, congratulations, and thank you so much for this time.
Oh, you're more than welcome.